Hi everybody, welcome back to Bobby's Bucks, where I share everything I do to harvest my next buck. And today we're out scouting. And scouting after the season, it's so important. It's basically the time where I do a majority of my scouting. Now if I end up going out of town closer to the season, of course I'll scout then, but where my buddies will set up in an area and start hunting right away, if I have 5 days, I'm gonna scout until I find a really good spot with scrapes and rubs, and because I would rather scout a little bit more until I find a good spot that'll pay off. Or you can always set up in an observation stand where you can see a lot of different terrains and areas where you can kind of close the distance and move in once you do see a buck or some good activity. It doesn't take too long to dial in some private land. And a big mistake people make is that they hang a stand and they don't want to move it. It's so important to close the distance, and just because you start the season in one spot doesn't necessarily mean you have to end the season there. I don't recommend hanging stands and leaving them. It's just so important to react to what you see. This time of year, I'm getting out, I'm trying to find a lot of tracks. I'm taking inventory of where those singled out tracks are, because it's most likely a buck, especially when you see them dragging their feet. That's indicative that it's a buck, but that's not always the case. I mean, if the snow's really deep, they can't help but drag their feet. So pay attention to the hoof or the track size, and this will give you a better idea of what kind of deer it is, if it's a big deer or if it's a younger deer. I'm looking for an abundance of tracks because that's most likely a doe group. This time of year, they're all herded up. And one of the hardest things to do is harvest a doe late season with a bow, because when they come in, it's security in numbers. They have so many eyes scanning the area. It takes everything you got just to get the bow off the tree and draw back on a deer. When we bought our property, well over 10 years ago, we only owned the property for about 3 weeks, and I already had a tree stand hung, and I harvested a doe that came in with about 12 other deer. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. It was really tough to get that shot off. I was lucky to get it done. But this time of year, all the sign is laid out for you. You can see where they're bedding down because all these ovals are melted. You can see these singled out trails. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to these trails, these single trails, and I'm going to walk these same paths, because that's a good place to find sheds. You're going to walk these main trails, sure, but these singled out trails, especially when the snow is out, it gives you an idea of where these bucks are walking, and they're probably going to shake their head, especially when they're crossing a creek or jumping a fence, where the terrain, where they have to jump. This jerks their head, the antler, their testosterone is dropping, and the antler is hardening, and it will fall right off their head. Every year they regrow them in April. So this time of year, it's important, especially if your property or if your spot's not paying off, get out there and hunt some new public. And to help you, don't stick to areas where the view is beautiful. Sure, it's nice to sit back and relax, and if that's what you're looking to do, of course, I'm not going to tell you, to not relax and do that. But if you want to kill bigger deer, if you want to harvest the best deer of your life, it's best if you stick to thick. Look for those dense areas, because that's how a buck is going to make their way through the property or traverse through the terrain. I'll tell you, years ago I hunted this spot out in Ovid, Michigan, and the property lines had these little strip of trees, and we're talking, trees for about 400 or 500 yards, and it's just a strip of trees, about a tree trunk wide. And you could see these bucks come through, and they would almost interweave between these tree lines. It was like they were braiding and cutting in between these trees, just because naturally that's how they move. They want to move with security. It's important to look for those thick areas and try to investigate those areas. You can probably see some really good tracks, and then you can set up appropriately. You're going to want to always set up with the wind in mind, so you can get an idea of when you can hang these stands on public, which here in Michigan it's September because our season starts in October. You'll have a plan for the coming season. I don't like to get out, say, spring, summer, and fall, only because I'm one of those guys that get poison ivy really easily. I can just be downwind of it and come back with a rash. It's not a good idea for me to be crawling through areas like that. So I have to be very careful when it comes to when I'm shed hunting. And this is what I do. I scout first, and then I shed hunt after. And I'll shed hunt based on the intel that I get from when I'm scouting. It's important to change the game plan if you're hunting open areas like this, because it's just not going to pay off. So many people are making that mistake, and they have these old hunting properties and these clubs that they don't want to hinge cut anything. They don't want to install any beds or brush. And if you can see 200-300 yards, that's a property that is not going to have mature deer walking through it. So get the chainsaw out, do some hinge cutting, make some beds. If you can, you know, take 3 trees and throw them down right on top of each other. Make yourself a nice bed triangle, and deer will move in no time. Look for that edge, that terrain, that change in from thick to, you know, really just any kind of transition from one kind of landscape to the other. Deer will like to walk that edge. Deer will like to investigate, come out to the edge, and you'll be able to find these tracks. And when you do find these tracks, go back later the following year, right before the season, and you can find your scrapes and your rubs, and then take it from there. My buddy Bill just passed, and this will be my first season hunting without talking to him about, you know, hunts and strategies. And he was a really good guy. He was a great hunter. And one of his strategies were he would set up next to private. He would let hunters push the deer to him. He would find these areas far from the parking area where people were just not hunting, they didn't want to hike. And a good strategy also is if you hike 20 minutes, your chances are pretty good that you're not going to run into hunters. If you hike 30 minutes from the road, your chances are great that you're going to have all that to yourself. Most hunters are only hunting 200 to 300 yards from the road because, for one, they don't want to drag a deer that far, and two, they just don't want to hike. It takes a little bit more work. So that's another strategy that you can implement. You can also, you know, look for some private land and hunt adjacent to it. These hunters, when they're coming out to their stands, they're going to push the deer out in the morning. They're going to push the deer out when they come back from lunch. So he had these stands. He hunted for years. They were tried and true. They were old faithful stands that he was almost guaranteed to go out there and always see deer, because these hunters capitalize on these hunters that are making these mistakes. So, you know, there's a lot of lazy hunters out there, you know, good people, but they're just hunting wrong. And if you're looking for public land to hunt, just simply get online and search public land in your state. The DNR has website maps for every state where you can find some hunting land. There's public land most likely within an hour to 2 hours from where you live. In most cases, it's even closer. So I wish you guys the best of luck. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I'll get back to everybody. Thank you for doing that. I always appreciate anybody who takes the time to leave a comment. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.